I'm your host, Matt Williams, and today we're going to talk about Thanksgiving. Now, everyone's got their own traditions as to whether you have ham or turkey or whatever it might be, so I'm not going to teach you how to make a turkey, but I am going to do a couple different sides that you might enjoy. We're going to take some cornbread here and some sausage and make a cornbread and sausage stuffing. We're also going to take some nice fresh cranberries and make a fresh cranberry sauce. We're going to take some butternut squash and make a butternut squash bisque. And last but certainly not least, we're going to make some mashed potatoes. We're going to take this 5 pounds of gold potatoes and we're going to put this whole tower of butter inside of it. All right, so get excited. This is going to be a good time. First thing we're going to do is these potatoes are going to take a while to cook. I'm going to take them, come over here, put them right into our water, turn our stove on here. One thing you'll notice is that I haven't peeled these, and that's on purpose. I really want to get a lot of the flavor of the potatoes, and I want our potatoes not to be too wet. So by keeping the skin on when we cook them, it's not going to leach out as much starch or flavor from the potato, and it's not going to let as much water in. So we're going to let those come up to a simmer. I've already salted this water. We're going to let those cook until they're fork tender. Now, one of the items for our stuffing is the cornbread. So I made just one box of store-bought cornbread, made it in a pan. It's only about 1/2 inch thick. I'm going to take that, and I'm just going to crumble it a bit and put it on a cookie sheet. So all I want to do is get a little bit more surface area here before I throw this in the oven. So we have the oven set at 325 degrees. We have a beautiful convection oven here. That air blowing over this is going to pull out any moisture. The less moisture that's in your bread, whether you're making a traditional stuffing or a cornbread stuffing, means that there's more room for it to absorb the flavor that you're going to build into your stuffing. So I'm going to go ahead and stick this in the oven. All right, now this soup we're going to make. It's a favorite of my family and friends. It's actually really pretty darn good for you. We're going to make it vegan today. Not that because I'm trying to be cool and be a vegan, but because that's just how it's going to work, and it's going to be fantastic. When we add our stock to it, we're using a vegetable stock today. You can certainly use chicken stock. But I'm going to move these sausage out of the way for now, and we'll get to cutting our vegetables for our soup. First thing is going to be some onion. So I want to do a real rough chop here. Actually, I'm going to cut off both ends of this onion. This is going to be a pureed soup. That's what a bisque is. Anytime you see bisque on a menu, if they actually know what they're talking about, a bisque is a pureed soup. It shouldn't be totally smooth. Typically, there's chunks of stuff in there, whether it's a lobster bisque or a vegetable bisque. There's little bits and pieces. So we're going to puree this, but we're not going to strain it or anything. We want to leave a little body in there. All right, we'll move this out of the way. Oh, no. Every time you use your knife, you should run it over a steel. It's amazing the difference it makes. It makes a huge difference. Also, always make sure you wipe it off, just because you don't want any little metal flakes to end up in your food. Once you're into that sort of thing. So I'm just going to give this a real rough chop. I'm going to make 3 cuts perpendicular to each other, just like that, and throw them right in our pan. 2 cuts, actually. I don't know why I said 3. It's going to end up being 3 pieces. Now, I'm going to take some celery, and I'm going to rough chop this. Once again, this is going to be pureed. It's all right if some of the leaves get in there. The leaves are good. The leaves are actually a wonderful thing to make a little salad out of when you're cleaning up your celery. Save some of the leaves. Toss them in with your other greens, and it's wonderful. And I'm going to do some carrots. Now, these carrots I actually didn't peel. I cleaned them. They're really clean. The skins are pretty thin, so I'm not worried about having to peel them. I'll cut these a little bit smaller, just for the sake of time, because these are a firmer vegetable. They're going to take a little longer to cook. So we'll go ahead and add that right in there. So we've got carrots, onion, celery, some nice aromatics, and then our butternut squash. So I bought this, already peeled. This is the way to go with butternut squash. I mean, you can certainly peel it yourself, but when it's fresh, when it's in season, you can't beat it when it's already been cleaned up for you. You want to look for it that it's nice and bright. It hasn't discolored much on the outside or at all on the outside. You want to look at the back of it too and feel it. See if there's any soft spots. If there are any soft spots, that means it's already started to rot. Now, I wouldn't buy that if I was at the supermarket, but if it was at my house and it had been sitting around for a few days, it's okay. You can just scrape it off with a spoon or something and still use the rest of it. So for this, you definitely want a nice sharp knife because the butternut is pretty firm. So we're going to go ahead and cube this. We're going to use a little more butternut than we did of our other vegetables because that's the name of the soup. It's a butternut squash bisque. Now, if you want to use some parsnips in this or you want to use any other root vegetables that you really like that have a good flavor, go ahead and throw them in there. This is going to be done very simply. If you want to add herbs, if you have the last little bits of your herb garden from outside, some thyme or whatever, throw that in, go right ahead. So I'm going to throw in our butternut squash. And we need some more butternut in there. So I'm going to grab this hunk here. But this is always a big favorite. We serve this Thanksgiving Day. This is the first thing we eat before we get on to the other stuff. And you'll see, this is, like I said before, it's a really healthy soup, but it's really tasty. It's kind of sweet. Our carrots are really sweet. Our butternut's pretty sweet. But also one of the liquids we use in here is some apple juice. And it makes that even that much more sweeter. So to this, I'm going to add our vegetable stock. So I'm going to add it right to it like so. And I'm going to add apple juice. And I'm going to add about 1.5 cups of apple juice. And the liquid should come most of the way up to the top. I didn't have enough vegetable stock there, so we're going to take a minute. I'm going to grab some more vegetable stock. We'll let our potatoes cook. We'll check on our croutons that are in the oven or a little, hopefully, dehydrating cornbread, and we'll keep on cooking. So in the little break there, our potatoes had a chance to come up to a simmer. We're going to let those cook until they're fork tender. I added enough stock here for our soup, so that's going to be the perfect amount of water. It's better to have a little bit less than you think than too much, because remember, we are going to puree this, and you want it to have a nice thick consistency. And if it's too thick, you can always add more liquid. But if it's too thin, then that adds a whole bunch of problems that you don't necessarily want to have to deal with Thanksgiving morning. All right, so our cornbread is all set. And if you want to check that out, you can see that it's golden brown around the edges, and it's dried out quite a bit. You can actually hear it crumble a little bit. And that's what we're looking for. So I'm going to take this, put it back here out of the way, let it come to room temperature. Now in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and get our cranberry sauce started, because that needs to cook for a couple minutes. So the ingredients for this are relatively simple, but there are a couple fun things in there that I think give it a little twist that will totally blow away store-bought cranberry and a little different than most recipes. And they are 2 oranges, which I have here, and some fresh thyme. So with the oranges, now as cool as this kitchen is and as comfortable as I look in it, this is not my home kitchen, unfortunately. It would be pretty cool to have. But so I didn't have all my tools here. I didn't have a zester. So I was going to zest these oranges, but instead I peeled them with a vegetable peeler. And I peeled them, I was very careful to make sure that when I peeled them, I didn't end up with much of the white part on them, because that white part's a little bit bitter. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to take these, like I did with this here, and we're going to julienne these orange peels. Now if you want a larger piece of orange, something to chew on, leave them big. If you don't want very much of it, dice it really small. Use your zester. You could use a box grater, a cheese grater as well. But I'm just going to take these pieces of peeled zest and just slice them really thin. And this is going to give wonderful flavor and a little bit different texture. It's still going to be a little bit chewy. So there's something to chew on in your cranberry sauce. Not like a big bite of turkey, but just a little something different. I'll make these a little bit smaller. Because you're going to think about the size of a cranberry. You don't necessarily want a big, long hunk of orange hanging off your spoon when you have a little spoonful of cranberry sauce. So I'm going to take that. I'm going to take both of these oranges, cut them in half. I'm going to pop out a couple of the visible seeds. And then I'm just going to squeeze and stick my spoon in here and spin it around and get as much juice out of there as you can. The pulp is totally fine. Even if you don't like no pulp juice, I promise you, this won't ruin your cranberry sauce. So go ahead and juice all these. So one year I was tasked with making cranberry sauce. And that's where this recipe came from, because I didn't want to, I was tasked with buying cranberry sauce. I didn't want to buy cranberry sauce. I mean, when you're a chef and you have a cookbook and stuff, whether it's fair or not, people have kind of higher expectations. I'm like, all right, I got to make something. And I tried this with a little bit of orange, and the orange went really well with the cranberry, and the thyme gave it a little savory note to what otherwise is a pretty sweet dish. There's an awful lot of sugar in here to counteract the tartness of the cranberries. So then to that, I'm going to add about 3/4 cup of water. I'm going to add half a teaspoon or so of cinnamon, about the same of our thyme leaves. I'm going to add 1.5 cups of sugar. It's a lot of sugar. And I'm going to add about a tablespoon of cornstarch. This is going to help thicken it a little bit. There's a lot of natural thickener in the cranberry, which is pectin, but this is going to help tighten it up a little more. One of the things that's really important when you're working with cornstarch is that you dissolve it in a cold liquid. Cornstarch is a great thickener. It thickens clear, it thickens very quickly, but if you add it to something that's hot, that's the point at which it thickens. So if I were to throw our cornstarch in here to our simmering cranberry sauce, it would thicken immediately, and you get all these little really starchy lumps. And we don't want that. So I'm just going to stir that around to make sure our cornstarch is dissolved. And I have about 6 cups of cranberries here. These are actually frozen cranberries. You can use fresh. If they're in season, definitely use fresh. Frozen cranberries are great, though. They're just as good as fresh, in particular with something like this. So I'm going to go ahead, turn this on, crank this up, let it come to a simmer. And you'll know when it's done, when it's starting to get done, because each of these cranberries is going to explode, essentially. The skin's going to burst, and it's going to release a lot of its flavor, and the color's going to change of our sauce. So we're going to let that simmer a little bit. We're going to take another break for a minute. I'm going to clean up. We'll get ready to cut some sausage. We'll get ready to start our sausage stuffing, and then we're going to have all of our dishes going at the same time, ready to come out for that perfect Thanksgiving lunch. Still waiting for our harder vegetables to get soft. Same thing with our potatoes. Our cranberry sauce, I just moved up to this burner. It's starting to come to a simmer. You don't want it to cook like crazy because it's just going to make a big mess. Remember, there's a lot of sugar in there, and the sugar is going to spatter, and it's sticky, and you don't want to have to clean that up. So if you have the time, take a little longer time and let it cook. So what I'm going to do to start our sausage and cornbread stuffing is I'm going to start with sausage. I'm going to take a sausage casing here, and these I've already cut. This is just a sweet Italian sausage. If you're using if you want it spicy, add a spicy Italian sausage. So you can cut this casing like that and drop it right in here. I'm going to turn this down a little bit. And another thing, if you like to, freak out your guests, is you can squeeze the casing like that and get it right out of there. All right, so that's a nice hot pan. It's going to sear our sausage. I'm going to come over here and wash my hands. Oh, hopefully. There we go. But the key to this is that you're going to brown that sausage. You're going to develop a lot of flavor while you're browning your sausage, which is going to make all the difference in your finished product. All right. So I'm going to move this out of the way. I don't want to cross-contaminate anything. That's why I purposely did that on the plate instead of doing it on my cutting board. Take a look at this. Just break it up, move it around a little bit. Now, some sausage have more fat in it than others. You need a fair amount of fat in your stuffing. Well, you don't need it, but I kind of want it. So what I'm going to end up doing is adding a little bit of butter to this, but I'm going to give this a little time to brown first. In the meantime, I'm going to cut up the rest of our vegetables for our stuffing. I'm going to take an onion, dice it. Now for this, I'm going to do it a little different. I want to dice it pretty fine because I don't want huge hunks of onion in my finished stuffing. So last time I just made real quick cuts through, but this time I'll take a little bit more time and be a little more refined. Same thing with the celery. So as you've seen me do before, I'm just going to take the tip of my knife, make little cuts, trying not to go through the core. Turn it. like so. And about half an onion is good. So that was 3 lengths of sausage, or about 4-ounce lengths, so that's about 8 ounces of sausage. Now I've made this before and I've had much more cornbread, I've had much less cornbread. I've used half cornbread and half white bread, but it's up to you. It's up to your personal preference, up to your taste, what you like to put in there. Now for our celery, I want to take this, and the same thing. I want this to be about the same size of the onion, because they're not the star of the show. They're very important. The celery, the onion are going to add some really nice texture, but you want to get your sausage. You want to get your cornbread. It's going to be the flavors and the things that you're going to work on most. Now we've got a little cranberry volcano over here, so before I have any issues, I want to go ahead and turn that down. I don't think it's going to be anything more than a little cranberry volcano, but I don't want it to end up everywhere. All right, so our sausage is starting to brown a bit. Okay, cool. So we've got a little bit of browning. Looking at this, though, I know I'm definitely going to need to add some more fat. So if your tower of butter isn't enough, I actually have an extra pound of butter here, just in case, for emergencies like this. But I'm not going to take much. It's about 1 ounce of butter, and just put that in there. That's going to melt, and what that's going to do is it's going to help our vegetables to cook and get coated in it. Because eventually what we're going to be looking for is that all the liquid in here is going to get absorbed by our cornbread. So we'll throw our onions and our celery in here. Mix it around a bit. Yeah, that's what we're looking for. Now once again, this is another preference thing. If you want big hunks of sausage, don't break up your sausage too much. If you have leftover sausage and you want to use it, it doesn't have to go in raw. One of the nice things I like about putting the sausage in raw is that you don't lose any of the fat. So the fat that goes in there is actually flavored like the sausage. All right, so we get a little more here. Now, on the bottom of my pan, there's some sticking going on. I don't know if you can see that in there, but there's some browning, and that's actually a good thing. The browning that we see at the bottom of this pan here is developing flavor. There's sugars in there that are caramelizing. It's a really good thing. Now, if that started turning black, that's when it's going to get bitter, and we don't want it. But at this point, that's fine. I'm going to let it hang out. I'm going to scrape it back into itself. When we add our liquid to this, we're going to find that that all comes off, and that's, they call it a fond on the bottom of the pan, and it gets absorbed as we add our liquid, and it goes right into the flavor of our stuffing. I'm going to give this a stir here. So some of our cranberries are just starting to burst a bit. It smells wonderful. It's too bad you guys can't smell it. All right, that's looking good. So now, before I add my liquid, I want to add our cornbread, because I want that cornbread to have a chance to first absorb the liquid that's in here now from the onions and the celery and the sausage and the butter. So this is cooled down enough that I can touch it. I'm just going to go ahead and slide our cornbread right in there, like so. We'll give this a little stir. Now this is the most important time as far as burning, because I have this burner still on just to keep a little heat going, but now you're absorbing all that liquid, so you're going to be more apt to burn on the bottom. All right. And you just want to give it a minute, maybe 2 minutes of turning around, of folding it over on itself. That way you can kind of get an idea of how much liquid is going to get absorbed by the bread. All right, so this can go off now. I'm going to go ahead and add our liquid. So you can use whatever you want. If you can use, the ideal thing if you're going to eat a turkey is to throw some turkey stock in there. This is actually a little bit more of that vegetable stock. And you want to add it just a little bit at a time. You only want enough moisture to hold it together. You don't want to end up with a really wet, kind of sloppy stuffing. So add it, let it sit for a minute or two. Let it totally absorb before you decide if you need a little more. If you add a little too much by accident, if you have some dry breadcrumbs, throw some breadcrumbs in there. That'll absorb some of the excess. That looks pretty darn good though. So the last thing I'm going to add to this before we just let it sit there is going to be some fresh sage. So I'm just going to pull the sage leaves right off the stem. Get another little bunch here. And we're going to chiffonade them. So chiffonade is just a fancy way of saying that you're going to cut it really thin. So I'm going to cut it really thin. Now I'm adding this right at the end of the cooking process because I want to give it a chance to open up and release some of its flavors, but not to see the real heavy, hard heat, because what that's going to do is it's going to just beat it up, it's going to lose some of its color, it's going to change its flavor a bit. So this stuffing is done. Now you could take this, stuff it inside a bird. I usually serve it on the side of the bird, and you could serve it just like this. Put it in a casserole dish. You can make this a couple days before you use them. Put it in a casserole dish, put it in a nice hot oven, let it warm up, get a crust on the top. It'll be fantastic. If it seems a little bit too dry, you can add a little bit more stock. You can drizzle a little butter on top. You can always drizzle butter on top of stuff. It makes it better. All right. Beautiful. Let's go back to our cranberry sauce here. Yeah, we're seeing, I don't know if you can see that, but the edge of it has started to split open there. And that's what we're looking for. They're all going to go pretty soon. I'll hold this up and you can see the thickness a little bit. It's still just a little bit thicker than water, but it's going to thicken up quite a bit. All right, I'm not worried about cross-contaminating. We're all family here. So I'm going to grab one of the big hunks of butternut squash and just feel it. And you can see as I squish it there, it mushes right up. This is done. This is ready to be pureed. So I'm going to take this, shut this off for now, because when I go to puree it, I don't want to be shooting hot soup all over the place. At the same time, let's check our potatoes. I'm just going to take my knife, pop it in there, comes right off. Our potatoes are all done. So I'm going to take a minute. I'm going to clean up and get ourselves organized to pull our potatoes out, to go ahead and puree our soup. We'll let this finish cooking and we'll get ready for our Thanksgiving dinner. All right, welcome back. So I've got my immersion blender here. I'm starting to puree our soup. You can kind of see the thickness of it there. I'm going to let it keep on going. Now, if you want it extra chunky, leave extra chunks. If you want it really fine, let it keep going. I'm finding our carrots are a little bit less cooked than the other stuff, so they're taking a little bit extra work to puree. But you get the general idea there. And I'll show you what texture we've got here, but you can see that now it's started to thicken quite a bit from the starch in our squash and from our other vegetables as well. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and give this a whirl, see if it needs to have any of its seasonings adjusted. Oh, that's pretty good. That's really good. You can really taste the squash. And that's great. I haven't added any salt or pepper to it. I think I'm going to add just a small pinch of salt to it, but that's going to be about it. If you wanted to add some more pepper to it, you could add a little hot sauce. You could add a little bit of white pepper. You could totally add a little bit of cream to this if you wanted to make it creamy. One of my favorite things to do with this is to serve it in a bowl and take some whipping cream and whip it just by hand, just until it just starts to thicken, and add a little bit of ground ginger to it, to the whipped cream. No sugar or anything, and put a dollop of that on top. It gives a great contrast in color, but also gives a great contrast in textures and flavors as that kind of melts in and flavors the rest of your soup. So that's right on. Our cranberry sauce back here is simmering perfectly. It started to thicken great. This only needs another 3 or 4 minutes. That'll be done. Over here, I've taken all our potatoes out. I dumped them on a sheet pan and I've let them sit here for about 5 minutes or so. 2 reasons. One, so that they're cool enough that I can handle without having to play hot potato. But also, more importantly, is to dry out the skins a little bit. I want to dry them out. I want to keep this as dry as possible. So I'm just going to use a knife. This is just a butter knife, and remove the peel off here. Now, you don't have to peel these. If you wanted to do them in a mixer and leave the peel, as long as your potato has a nice thin skin. But for this, I like to remove I'm going to all this work, and I'm going to add all that butter, I really am, to this potato. I want to make my potatoes be nice and clean. Now I'm going to use a ricer to make these nice and fluffy. And this is a ricer here. And what it does is you put something in, throw a potato in there, whoops, without the skins. Go like this, and just squeeze it, and it looks like little grains of rice. And it's beautifully nice and fluffy. It's going to get rid of any little bits of skin that are in there. I'll rice this other one too. Now another option you have when doing these is to use a food mill. And I've used a food mill before. And when I use the food mill, I actually leave the peels right on. And some of the peels will get through the little holes, but it gives a little bit of a rustic feel. So I'm going to keep on peeling these, ricing these through, and I'm going to go ahead and start adding the butter to it. And then we'll get Arthur up here. We'll see if he can tell how many pounds of butter are in these potatoes, and we'll taste everything else. Welcome back. So here are our potatoes. I had to change bowls because the other one just wasn't big enough for all those potatoes and all the butter. Here's our last stick of butter. Going right in here now. Hey Arthur, how are you?
Great, yourself?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me back here at Hudson Appliance. I just need to finish up these potatoes, so I just added a stick of butter to them here. Now it's really important when we do this that your butter is just at room temperature. You want it to be very soft, okay? Because if you use really cold butter, it's going to drop the temperature of your potatoes. And if you're just adding a little bit of butter, that's not a huge deal. But with the amount of butter that we're putting in these, whoops, you want to make sure that it's nice and warm, essentially. I added some salt and some really coarse ground black pepper for a little bit of pizzazz, if you will. So you just want to stir it until the butter's all melted. If you don't stir it all the way until all the butter's all melted, what will happen is after you stop stirring, it'll melt and you'll have a little pocket of butter. Now a pocket of butter definitely sounds like a good time, but if you want real light, fluffy potatoes that don't get greasy, you want to make sure it's totally mixed in. So let me give you a little tour of what we made today.
Okay.
So over here we have a little bit of a different twist on your traditional stuffing. It's got sweet Italian sausage and cornbread in it. We've got a nice whole berry cranberry sauce that has its own little twist here, and I heard that's one of your favorites.
Oh, it's definitely my favorite.
And there's a little bit of thyme, some orange juice, and some orange zest in there. We've got our butternut squash bisque, and then we've got our potatoes. These mashed potatoes here are, we took some time and energy and effort to try to make sure that the potatoes didn't get too wet. We kept the peels on the whole time and then peeled them after they were cooked.
Okay. I understand you put some butter in there. How much did you put in?
You understand correctly. So you saw me put in 1/12 of what we put in.
1/12?
We actually got 12 sticks of butter into this bowl of potatoes.
12
sticks? After we remove all the peels and stuff, this isn't that much over 4 pounds of potatoes and 3 pounds of butter. So
wow.
This is a good time waiting to happen. Sorry that you can't taste it, but we can. What do you feel like tasting today?
Well, let's start at this end and go right down to the potatoes.
All right, let's give the stuffing a whirl. So you should get some little crunch from some of the celery and onion.
That's very good. Very good.
All right, that's what we're looking for.
It's very good.
Yeah, a little different, definitely. And that would be taste totally different if you stuck it inside your bird because it would take some of the flavor from the turkey.
Now, this is my favorite.
You have to let me know what you think. So it's not as sweet as some. It's still got some punch from the cranberries in there.
Really good. Really good.
All right, good. All right, and the last thing we've got here, we can eat right out of the pot because, right, we're with friends in the kitchen.
That's right.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, that's good. That's really good. Now that is wicked good.